Good afternoon to you. 3:06 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up today on the program, we're going to be joined by Joe Digenova. That's right, the former U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia is going to join us this hour at 3:30. We'll talk to him about the Justice Department's ongoing meddling in the presidential election. He's got some thoughts on that subject. Then Congressman Matt Rosendale joins us at 4 o'clock today. Vladimir Zelenskyy of Ukraine is right now wearing a sweatshirt inside the Oval Office, meeting with Joe Biden and pleading for more money from the American taxpayer. Aaron Sibarium is here at 4:30 today from the Washington Free Beacon. We look at Harvard. That's where they have not fired their president because she is a black woman. They are not judging her based on her merit. They are judging her based on her race today. We'll get into that. And then Ralph Norman is also here at 5:30. We'll talk to him as Congress looks to increase and expand its surveillance power over you. You can join us. 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Vladimir Zelenskyy, Joe Biden in the Oval Office just moments ago. This is the breaking news.
Thank you. Before the press, hey, whoa, hush up a second, okay? I got one more thing to say.
A little anger from the president.
I just signed another $200 million drawdown from the Department of Defense for Ukraine, and that'll be coming quickly. Thank you.
Thank you.
President Biden, are you mad at me? President Biden, are you mad at me?
What ensues is another 40 seconds of Peter Doocy attempting, without any success, to get a question to Joe, and Joe just staring at him and smiling and laughing the whole time as the sheepdog women start yelling at everyone to get out of the room. Get out, get out, get out, get out, everyone get out. Okay. All right, so that's what happened in the Oval Office just moments ago. Additionally, what happened is Joe Biden read a pre-written statement that said that America doesn't deserve border security and that Ukraine deserves $60 billion.
Congress needs to pass a supplemental funding for Ukraine before they break the holiday recess, before they give Putin the greatest Christmas gift they could possibly give him. And so because we've seen what happens when dictators don't pay the price for the damage and the death and the destruction they cause, and they keep going when no price is paid.
Yeah, and he said that Republicans need to give up the whole border security thing, and because, hey, just help Ukraine out. Just help Ukraine. And it's amazing, too, because what the Biden White House actually wants is to tether a bunch of things together and pass them, mostly by saying we need to rush support to Israel, therefore we need to give $60 billion to Ukraine. Now, we wouldn't be giving Israel anywhere near that amount. We're giving them something like $14 billion rather than the $60 billion that we'd be giving to Ukraine. Our border remains collapsed in this scenario and not taken care of. The Biden administration doesn't care. They're perfectly happy with bringing in millions upon millions of people. They don't like the current people who are here who don't support the Biden administration. So maybe we'll try our hand with some foreign nationals, see if they like what we're selling. Senator Chris Murphy said this on television over the weekend. He's angry that Republicans are trying to secure the border. He's a Democrat. Take a listen.
It's very different to say, on top of that funding, we are going to make major changes in law. And that's what Republicans are asking for. They are asking for very severe, very draconian immigration.
Not so. They're asking for the border to be enforced is what they're asking. And they're asking for a less ludicrous asylum system. These are not draconian changes. These are normal changes that you would make to build a system that respects our sovereignty.
Policy changes that they know could not pass if they weren't holding up support for the war against Vladimir Putin.
But isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing how much the war in Ukraine means to somebody like Democrat Senator Chris Murphy? It means so. It's like the only way they realize the only way they can get us to secure the border is by exploiting this Ukraine funding. Wait, how is it that Ukraine funding's at the top of your list? How did that happen? How did the most important thing on the planet become Ukraine funding to you? Can you explain that in detail, please?
If they weren't holding up support for the war against Vladimir Putin.
But isn't that the exact
I just
point?
think that's the difficulty.
Isn't that their exact point? This is it's a crisis. I think many people agree what's happening at the border is a crisis.
This is a CNN host, Poppy Harlow, who is pained to admit that many people would admit that what's happening on our border is a crisis.
Isn't that their exact point? This is it's a crisis. I think many people agree what's happening at the border is a crisis. So this is a moment we got to deal with it at home, and then we're going to help Ukraine too.
Yeah, I think we should separate the two.
Oh, really? You think we should separate them? Okay, pass them all as standalone bills. Put them up for an up or down vote. Why don't you do that? That's not what Democrats are doing. That's not what they're doing at all. They're exploiting the October 7th attack in Israel in order to get $60 billion to Ukraine. They're lumping in so-called border security measures. They say they're giving $14 billion to border security. They're not doing any such thing. They're expanding the machinery involved in bringing foreign nationals into our country. That's what that money would be for. So why don't we separate all of these things then, Chris Murphy? I'm happy with that. Go ahead, separate them, up and down votes for all of them. But they don't want to do that. So, yes, it's a lie. It's so crazy that you have a CNN host asking, well, shouldn't we secure our own border first? Yeah, we should definitely secure our own border first. No question. It's one of the most pressing disasters that is crushing our country right now. We have actual invasion going on, an actual invasion, millions and millions of people. We have actual fentanyl. The cartels are shooting people. That we heard from Border Patrol officials. They're shooting people between the eyes who don't play by the cartel's rules. The cartels are in charge of our southern border right now. We are not. We are not. And all these dummies, they're acting like we've got all this like wiggle room. Well, maybe we'll deal with the border at some point, but right now we got to give money to Ukraine. This is the most insulting possible crap. The most insulting possible crap. Let's see. What have these guys said about all this? Mike Johnson is the Speaker of the House. He's had remarks on this. He met with Zelenskyy. Was this earlier today that he met with Zelenskyy? Yeah, he met with Zelenskyy earlier today, and here's what he said after coming out of that meeting.
Thank you all for being here. Just had a good meeting with President Zelenskyy. I reiterated to him that we stand with him and against Putin's brutal invasion. The American people stand for freedom, and they're on the right side of this fight. I have asked the White House since the day that I was handed the gavel as Speaker for clarity. We need a clear articulation of the strategy to allow Ukraine to win. And thus far, their responses have been insufficient.
Nothing.
They have not provided us the clarity and
We've never gotten any of this. When have you ever gotten a clear picture on the end state for Ukraine? Never. Throughout this entire thing, you've never gotten a picture like that. Of course, the death and destruction continues. More and more Ukrainian lives are being lost. The average age of fighters in Ukraine is rising precipitously because the youngest Ukrainians have all been slaughtered in the war. Not to mention, of course, the many Russians who have died. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people. So what's going to bring an end to the bloodshed, and what's in the American interest? Those are centerpieces of a conversation that adults would have. Zelenskyy today was thanking Joe Biden for arranging meetings with defense contractors yesterday. Did you know that? Zelenskyy met with the heads of all of the U.S. defense contractors yesterday to talk with them. How is this squarely in the American interest?
Detail that we requested over and over since literally 24 hours after I was handed the gavel as Speaker of the House. And so what the Biden administration seems to be asking for is billions of additional dollars with no appropriate oversight, no clear strategy to win, and none of the answers that I think the American people are owed.
Yeah, all this money keeps getting stolen. Even Zelensky's administration has admitted that corruption is running rampant. All the money is being stolen. Or much of it is. But then Mike Johnson went in the appropriate direction. Is, hey, wait a second. We do have a border that's wide open. Did you know 12,000 people crossed our border last week on a single day? On a single day. 12,000 people. I don't know what the size of your high school was, but most people don't have 12,000 people in their high school. It's a lot of your high school, perhaps. Perhaps. I think my graduating class was something like 80 people. It's a lot of my high schools. A lot. That would be packed into all of the foreign nationals coming into this country. Here's what Mike Johnson said on that.
I have also made very clear from day one that our first condition on any national security supplemental spending package is about our own national security first. The border is an absolute catastrophe.
Yeah.
And this is because of the policies of this White House and this administration.
We have over 100,000 people dying a year. We have over 100,000 people dying because of the open border. And it gets left out of the New York Times coverage. They don't mention this. If they bring up the fentanyl crisis, the opioid crisis in the United States at all, they almost never mention the border. You could do a search of the article, as I so often do. I'll see the New York Times piece, fentanyl. I'll look through it and I'll say, all right, let's search the article. Does the word border appear in this? Does the word Mexico appear in this? Do the word cartels appear in this? No, they don't. Why is that? Why don't they? They're perfectly content allowing the crisis to continue, apparently. They just like mentioning it. Oh, yeah, there is a fentanyl crisis going on. But no plans on how to resolve it because we won't even identify where it's coming from. Because it leads you to, oh, yeah, maybe Biden should secure the border.
We had 12,000 illegal crossings on one day last week alone, on Wednesday. We have almost now 280 known terrorists that have been apprehended at the border. None of this counts the gotaways. If you add the numbers up, it's almost 7 million people who have been encountered at the border just since President Biden took office, and at least 2 million gotaways. This is twice the population of my state of Louisiana. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death for Americans age 18 to 49 in this country.
Yes.
Fentanyl poisoning, because it's allowed over the border. We have human trafficking and all the other terrible things. In the last 3 months, October, November, December alone, we've had more illegal crossings at the border than in any entire year during the Obama administration. The American people see this. They feel it acutely. They see all the terrible societal ills that come from this, and it must be addressed. So I've made this very clear, again, from the very beginning when I was handed the gavel.
Yeah, that we've actually got to address the border. Why is this difficult? Because obviously Biden doesn't want to secure it. That's the answer to that question. And we'll fight tooth and nail to fund other people's wars and not secure our own border, which he, of course, has made worse. He's human trafficking millions of foreign nationals into our country right now with our money. Senator Rand Paul had some remarks on this subject this morning. He said, this is all insane. This is crazy. We're going to give money to Ukraine that we don't even have. And guess who we're going to empower by giving $60 billion to Ukraine? If you guessed China, that would be correct.
But it's irresponsible to simply borrow more money. To borrow the money from China, simply to send it to Ukraine, makes no sense.
No.
And makes us weaker,
None.
not stronger. But let's be honest. Most of Congress doesn't seem to care about the debt, doesn't seem to care how much money we shovel out the door and out of the country. Why? Because it's not their money. Every day, Milton Friedman's statement is proven correct, that nobody spends somebody else's money as wisely as their own. I doubt the big spenders in Congress will ever consider spending any of their own money, but Americans across the land should sit up and notice and attach blame to these profligate spenders.
Yeah, all right. So that's a point well taken. Congress, they don't even care if they're spending other people's money. And in this case, it's money, again, that we don't even have. We'd have to borrow it. We'd have to print it. Hurting the United States of America. And to go back to what Speaker Johnson said, okay, you want to spend it on Ukraine, justify it. Tell me how the money's being spent. What's the end state? Where does this lead to? How do we end up? How does this help us? Have you noticed they haven't bothered answering any of those? They just made it a moral imperative. If you don't support it, if you don't support spending your children into bankruptcy, you are supporting Vladimir Putin. That's it. That's the whole argument. That's it. Biden said it today. A Christmas gift for Vladimir Putin if you don't send another $60 billion to Ukraine. We really do have a ton to get to today. In addition to the latest effort to spend more of your money in other countries, Congress is shoving along. They're trying to do it quickly. An effort to expand their surveillance of the American people. Plenty of Republicans are compromised on this question as well. We'll get into the details of that coming up. Congressman Ralph Norman will talk to us about that in detail at 5:30. Let's take a phone call. I've got Leo in Colorado calling in right now on line 3. Leo, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. How you doing? Good.
sir.
Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah.
Hey, I wanted to put things kind of in perspective, being retired Army and that, and finishing up with Space Force. It looks like I'll be a free agent after the first of the year. But I may have to come back and be your co-host.
Right on.
But, imagine 82nd Airborne at Fort Bragg, or they call it Fort Liberty now. Imagine that size element, 10 to 15,000 troops invading our border every day. That's what we've got coming in, an Army division level of people. And technically, with all the ones we're finding from all these other countries that are our adversaries, technically, they're unarmed combatants. The only thing they're missing is picking up arms when they get here, and I'm sure the cartel's helping them out there with that too. Well, we're going to have a real mess on our hands.
Yeah, I agree with you. And have you noticed, Leo, when you talk about this in military terms, and a military analogy is more useful than the one I made. I was talking about just your high school graduating class, but a military analogy is a good one because have you noticed that these are almost all men? These are what we refer to as military-aged males. They're all relatively young, the kind of guys that another nation might conscript into service, and they're all just pouring across our border. You don't see a ton of women and children. You're seeing a lot of young men coming in.
Yes, exactly, and that's what our concern is because they're all going to be gotaways, and we don't know where they're going. We've FBI had a thing on some years ago about terrorist cells. They know where a lot of them are. They pick the rural areas and then they set up their training camps and stuff. And out here in Colorado, man, it's getting scary. But we need to pay attention.
A full-size division coming over the border each day.
Each day.
That's a useful analogy because it's unfortunately true.
Real quick, I want to say I've got a friend in Ukraine. She's a nurse, and we've known each other for years. But she got laid off, and I'm like, wait a minute, where's the money that we're sending? Aren't they supposed to be paying for first responders and nurses and medical? Where's all that money? We need an accountability of all the funds going into Ukraine.
And guess what? We're not getting accountability. Thanks, Leo. I appreciate the call. Coming up next, Joe Digenova, former U.S. attorney, will react to the Justice Department's election meddling. Good afternoon. 3:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Congressman Matt Rosendale is here at 4 o'clock. At 4:30 from the Free Beacon, with a closer look at Harvard's goofy president, Erin Sabarium. She stole a lot of her academic work through the years. And then Ralph Norman, the congressman, is here at 5:30 as Congress is looking to expand the federal government's surveillance of you. You can join me. 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Jack Smith wants the Supremes to stop Trump's legal appeals. Those pesky legal appeals, saying he shouldn't even be prosecuted anyway. Jack Smith is alleging that Donald Trump tried to steal the election. And now he wants to force some of the back and forth to go right up to the United States Supreme Court. The court has, in turn, asked Donald Trump's lawyers to send a response to all of this by next week so they can take a closer look at it. Let's get into the details of what was really going on here and what it really all means with Joe Digenova now. He's a legal analyst and former U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia. Sir, as always, good to have you. Thank you.
Great to be with you, Vince.
All right, so Jack Smith wants to skip the pesky appeals process. Why?
Because he wants to have his trial before the election and get a conviction and get a sentence and get the president somehow disqualified, tie him up in court. It's patently obvious what's going on here, and while it's not embarrassing to the Department of Justice, it should be.
How unusual is it for an attorney, a federal attorney, to skip all of the appeals courts and go right to the Supreme Court with a petition like this?
It's extremely unusual, notwithstanding what you've heard some commentators say on television. It's very unusual. It does happen from time to time in rare cases. I think it happened in the Pentagon Papers case, actually. But that was 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's not an everyday occurrence. So it's unusual. And in this case, it's unjustified. There's no reason to have this case heard quickly, except to have it affect the election.
So as I understand it, the case that Trump is making is that he's entitled to immunity for a number of reasons. One of them was that he was president of the United States at the time of the behavior in question, and he was merely exercising the powers of the office. And additionally, that this places Trump in a bit of double jeopardy, considering the constitutional remedy to a dispute like this is impeachment. It already was conducted. The Senate acquitted him. So a legal process in the courts is improper and unconstitutional. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's what he's arguing. I don't think the argument about impeachment is a good one. Impeachment is a political process with regard to your right to remain in office. It doesn't have anything to do with the criminal justice system. It doesn't affect double jeopardy under the Fifth Amendment. But the president does have good arguments, that he can make about his immunity. And so far that hasn't worked in any court in the United States. His arguments about that have been rejected everywhere. So have his efforts to remove state cases to federal court. Whether or not the Supreme Court would be more solicitous of his view, I simply don't know. The court's written very little about this, and maybe that's why they wanted to hear from the president to see whether or not they should expedite the appeal process, although I think, again, I can't see any reason to expedite anything.
Is it possible that this ends in a way that benefits Trump? In other words, the Supreme Court says, okay, yes, we'll expedite this process, and then by the end of it, they render a judgment that actually, yes, Trump is entitled to immunity here.
Well, that could happen, and that would be quite a victory for the president, the former president.
Yeah.
But nobody knows the answer to that question, whether or not they would do that.
Okay.
Even with a conservative court, it isn't clear whether or not the president's arguments about his immunity. He clearly was president of the United States when all of this happened, and there isn't any doubt about that. The question is whether or not he was exercising functions of the presidency when this occurred. And nobody doubts that if he had murdered someone, that wouldn't be covered by immunity at any point in time.
Sure. Okay, so then there's the question of the election interference that we started with. The Justice Department in the past has made a big deal out of, we don't want to interfere in elections. In fact, we have a policy against it, not to have any criminal proceeding that could jeopardize the ability for the American people to render a judgment. So we don't want to be involved in play in elections here. Isn't this Jack Smith straight up saying that actually the point of the Justice Department is to interfere in elections, and we're trying to accelerate this to make sure it happens during the election?
Of course, that's exactly what's going on here. There is no reason to accelerate the trial schedule in any of these trials. They can all wait till after the election.
Yes.
But he doesn't want that. Jack Smith, wants to affect the outcome he knows he's going to get a conviction in the District of Columbia if they go to trial. There's just no doubt about it. He's going to get a conviction. This jury poll is completely prejudiced against the President of the United States. And no matter what Judge Chutkan says, poo-pooing the concerns of the defense about the ability of the president to get a fair trial, there is no way that President Trump can get a fair trial in the District of Columbia. And so Jack Smith knows that.
Yes.
He knows he's going to get a conviction, and he wants it to happen before the election.
But perhaps one of the reasons, other than meddling in the election explicitly, that Jack Smith is motivated for this is because he thinks, well, there's no chance of getting a conviction if Trump wins, because he could just instruct the attorney general to stop the prosecution, or he could just issue himself a pardon and move on. In other words, Jack Smith would be angry that the American people would render a judgment before he has a chance to.
Sure. Well, he certainly doesn't want the American people electing Donald Trump president, because Trump would have the power to pardon himself. There's no law on that, but there's no law that says he can't, and
right.
The pardon power is not circumscribed in the Constitution. There's no language that limits it. So, clearly, I mean, he wants his pound of flesh, because even if Trump wins the election and does eventually pardon himself, let's theoretically say that.
Yeah.
Smith can then say, hey, I convicted him. He was guilty. The American people, in terms of the jury in the District of Columbia, spoke. And yet the American people then elected him president of the United States. What's the value of that conviction? I don't know. I mean, who knows? It wouldn't be worth very much if Trump became president and pardoned himself.
And it is possible for Trump to tell the Attorney General to just knock it off, correct? If he becomes president again.
Oh, sure. He could do what Bill Barr did in the case of the General Flynn prosecution, which is order the case dismissed. In that case, it was over the objection of the trial judge, who did everything he could to delay dismissing the case until it became fairly obvious that if he didn't, there were going to be some serious consequences for the trial judge. Emmett Sullivan was his name.
Right. Because I know there's often this big thing about, the president is separate and distinct from the Justice Department, shouldn't be involved in the affairs of the Justice Department, which is a funny thing to say because, remember when Joe Biden took office after that, there were some people who were fighting congressional subpoenas from the January 6th committee, which was improperly composed in the first place. And right. Joe Biden straight up told the press they should be prosecuted. He wanted the Justice Department to prosecute them for contempt of Congress for not responding to these ridiculous subpoenas. Now, of course, you're watching the same scenario play out this week for Hunter Biden, and, Joe can't talk about it. You see, it's the Justice Department is totally independent.
Well, the president has influenced the Justice Department by his public statements and by his various intimations about his son, by simply saying that his son did nothing wrong. He was influencing the Justice Department and sending a clear message, which they heard at the Justice Department. From the evidence of what happened in Delaware from the IRS whistleblowers, that the assistant U.S. attorney and the U.S. attorney up in Delaware purposely avoided questions about the Biden family, no search warrants for the Biden facilities. So it was clear that the Biden desires to leave the family alone were heated all along the way.
Yes.
And, of course, the only reason this blew up was because the trial judge in Delaware blew up the plea agreement, and then we ended up with this fake case being filed against Hunter Biden in California, which, lo and behold, manages to avoid any charges which would implicate the sitting president, Joe Biden.
Yeah, and I may get a chance to return to the Hunter Biden story with you in a moment, but I have one more question for you on Jack Smith. We see that he intends to use Trump's cell phone data at trial. The cell phone that Trump was using while he was president of the United States. Jack Smith has apparently raided it and extracted and pulled out a bunch of the data from his cell phone that he intends to use as an exhibit at trial. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here. My impression was that Trump is entitled, as president of the United States, to executive privilege, and that would include the contents and conversations on his cell phone, wouldn't it?
Sure would.
So is Jack Smith doing something unconstitutional here?
No, because I assume that he got permission from Judge Beryl Howell, who was the former chief judge of the United States District Court in D.C., to do that and to get those things. And as you know, Beryl Howell is the one who created the situation where she found a crime fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege and allowed all of Trump's lawyers to be forced to give up notes and go in the grand jury and testify against their client, or at least testify about their client, maybe not against their client. I'm sure Beryl Howell blessed this seizure and said that it wasn't privileged with any privilege. I think Judge Howell has proven herself to be no friend of the Constitution and certainly no friend of any criminal defendant. Her performance in this case, along with most of the judges on the U.S. District Court here, has been an embarrassment.
It's amazing what we're witnessing. Back to the Hunter Biden story now with you. You do see this indictment come out this past week indicating that
yes.
that Hunter Biden has been hit with 9 tax-related charges for failing to pay millions of dollars in taxes. And he classified a bunch of obviously personal and many sexual expenses as if they were business expenses. And, of course, they weren't. Any fair reading of the indictment demonstrates that that wasn't for business at all. So that's interesting. But what's also interesting is whose name is not mentioned. You mentioned this a moment ago. Joe Biden doesn't come up in this. We aren't seeing any Foreign Agent Registration Act violations, any charges to that effect. And also, I thought it was kind of curious that the man who's been giving Hunter Biden so much of the money, Kevin Morris, to pay off all of his debts, is described throughout the indictment as a, quote, personal friend. Like the Justice Department is actually straight up buying the Biden family's explanation for this, rather than treating him as a campaign donor who's giving in-kind contributions to the Bidens.
Well, I think that the entire case against Hunter Biden is a farce. The indictment in California is something that David Weiss was forced to do because he was embarrassed into this position by the IRS whistleblower disclosures on Capitol Hill. Those men are heroes. They are worthy of all kinds of awards and kudos, and they deserve the financial support of the American people. They should give to them and send them money and help them out. It's pretty obvious that this guy, David Weiss, is a corrupt United States attorney. He's not doing anything for the right reason. His performance has been embarrassment to anyone who's ever been a United States attorney. His judgment has been completely political. It's hard for me to talk about this and not kind of violate the FCC code by talking about him, because he's such a disgrace. And this indictment in California is a nothing burger. It doesn't mention Farah. It does, because that would involve the president. It doesn't mention bribery, because that would involve the president. It doesn't mention a conspiracy, because that would involve the president plus other members of the family. It is a joke. It's a fill-in-the-blanks indictment that he could have returned 5 years ago. Instead, it's 5 years late, and he missed all the really good tax years, 2014, 2015, because all of those involved the president of the United States. So when you look at this and you see how transparently political the decisions are and how corrupt the decision-making has been in D.C., Delaware. I mean, U.S. Attorney in D.C., Matthew Graves, would not partner with Mr. Weiss when he wanted to bring cases in D.C. Isn't that a shame? Mr. Graves didn't want to partner. I thought Mr. Graves loves to partner with people. He looks like he's just kind of partnering kind of guy when you take a look at him. He shows up. Actually, he doesn't show up at many news conferences. I think that's because he's so embarrassed by his performance as United States Attorney for the District of Columbia. I mean, the crime spree in this city that's going on right now is the direct result of incompetent law enforcement by the Metropolitan Police Department and the United States Attorney's Office and the D.C. City Council that loves crime and loves criminals.
Well, Matt Graves, was it yesterday? He did a presser where he claims he's going to get tough on carjackers now, which is funny because it happens right after an FBI agent got carjacked. And suddenly the feds care, you know?
Well, why hasn't he been tough up until now? Carjacking is bad no matter who it happens to or when it happens or how many times. And all you have to do is talk to somebody who's been the victim of it and had a .45 stuffed in their face and had their car taken away from them.
Well, I tell you, if Hunter Biden was carjacked, they'd be all over it in an instant.
Thank you. He is a victim. He is a victim.
He is the victim of this story, of course. Joe Digenova, thank you very much, former U.S. Attorney and my friend. Good to talk to you, sir, as always.
You bet, Vince. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you. It's 3:50 now. So we were just talking a moment ago with Joe Digenova about all of the crime problems in Washington, D.C., a lot of problems in D.C., to include truancy. Students either not showing up to school at all or showing up very late. The truancy officers, they still exist. Sometimes you see the D.C. police vans rolling around. It says truancy cop. Trying to find the people who are not in school, the kids who are not in school. So the D.C. City Council today had a hearing on the subject. You ready for this? I swear to you, this is a real story. The D.C. Council hearing was supposed to begin at 11:30 this morning, according to reporter Tom Sherwood. And it was supposed to address truancy and school absenteeism. The meeting started 2 hours and 13 minutes late. The D.C. City Council didn't start its truancy meeting until 2 hours and 13 minutes after its scheduled start time. So if you can't do it on the D.C. City Council, why are you expecting the children to do it in school? They didn't notify anybody. Parents, educators, everybody's sitting around waiting for this meeting to start. It took almost 2.5 hours for it to finally get going. So, in case you're wondering how things are in D.C. right now. Might be a sign. All right, coming up, Congressman Matt Rosendale is going to join us just minutes away. We'll chat with him about this latest visit today. Just happened a few minutes ago. Volodymyr Zelenskyy visiting the White House today, hat in hand. $60 billion, please. And then Aaron Sibarium will join us in this next hour as well as we examine what is going on at Harvard. They are not firing their president, despite the fact that she can't condemn calls for Jewish genocide, and she stole a bunch of her academic product. More on that ahead on the Vince Coglianese Show.